it is such a privilege and a joy to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Anytime, anytime. Unseen Skies is wonderful. It's a great film. Terrifying, uh, but it is phenomenal. Um, how did you what made you want to tell this story? How did you first meet Trevor?
So I've actually been sort of tracking what Trevor been doing for a while. I suppose in another life, I was an investigative journalist and a foreign correspondent for a number of years, and that's when I first learned of Trevor Paglen's work. And he was traversing the Nevada and California deserts at that time, trying to figure out what was going on at black ops sites or what they looked like, what it looked like, um, at these sites that were basically off the map. What did these invisible places look like? And that really captured my imagination at the time. And it wasn't until a number of years later when we reconnected and he was working on the orbital reflector project that we decided, okay, let's make a feature, not just about orbital reflector and that sort of trajectory, that narrative trajectory about, you know, trying what is involved in putting something up in space, but also about his wider work.
Yeah, I mean this is an incredible project that I'm still processing. Like there's just so much to discuss with this particular film. Is there anything, I mean, along this journey for you, is there something that you wish that the public understood more about satellites and privacy?
And I think for me, at the core, this film is an examination of power
Mm,
and infrastructures that are built into our landscapes that facilitate power, and how it's really easy to miss that if you don't know what to look for. And so in a way we're trying, and Trevor's artworks try to train you how to see these infrastructures of power. And I found that really compelling and fascinating. And so for me, this is a film that kind of examines the um, evolution of surveillance technologies from what it once was, which was largely state surveillance, to what it is largely now, which is corporate surveillance. And you see that with big tech, and you see that with how COVID, the pandemic, has really created this disruption in the way that we conduct our work and our schooling, and even all of our healthcare. It's online, and it's created this disruption that has allowed the acceleration of surveillance technologies into our lives, into our homes, into our schooling, into our workplaces. And so that's for me the core of what this film is about. This examination of power.
absolutely, and the film for me sort of jukes when it's talking about military surveillance and then starts talking about social media and Google and these things, and you're like, oh, okay. Um, I was wondering, if you could expand on that a little more from your perspective. What are those similarities between the social media frenzy and the government surveillance, which we hear about but we don't see?
I mean, I almost think that government surveillance is a little bit more antiquated than what it is that Facebook and Google have
Mm,
on us. I mean, Facebook and Google, and I don't. Well, let's not um, let's not pick out any one particular tech company, but a lot of these major tech companies have granular data about our lives that state surveillance apparatus would only dream of having. I mean, they know how you feel at particular moments. They know what pushes your buttons. They know your innermost thoughts. Because you're talking to your friends, and you're using social media platforms in order to communicate with them, and they're seeing what you're scrolling, they're seeing what you're searching on the internet at odd hours of the night. I mean, this is a sort of data that that a surveillance apparatus can only dream of. And the thing about the sort of corporatization of surveillance is what these tech companies are usually using it for is in order to sell you more products. Like, in a way, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Basically kind of outlines how, these tech companies are basically the oil barons of this century. But the thing that is being mined, the thing that is being extracted is us,
Mm.
like is our behaviors. We are the resource being extracted in order to then sell things back to us, or change our behaviors even. And there's something inherently anti-democratic about the way that is operated, and the way that we can't really opt out from that, or the way that we don't really know how information is being used and processed and where it goes, and how decisions are being made, like very important decisions in terms of insurance and in terms of getting credit and in terms of getting jobs even. So we're not aware of the inner workings of a lot of these surveillance technologies that have really big implications on our daily lives. And this is what we're trying to lift the lid on, in the film. We're trying to kind of lift the lid on the inner workings of surveillance technologies to give you a kind of glimpse as to how it works, so that you can kind of make better informed decisions about what it is you do put out online and how you do engage with tech companies, because there are real implications for the way you operate.
Well, that raises an interesting question. I love what you're saying there, and it definitely, I like that you use the term anti-democratic. But so much of these things, and I'm speaking strictly of social media here, not against, about government surveillance, of course. But we volunteer so much of this information. We, like we are been very quick to say, "Take my life, please." To paraphrase an old joke, it's every detail of our lives. We're like, "No, I'll store that online. I'll put that picture out for other people to see. I'll put that credit card information. I'll put that, why do you think that's been so easy for us? We've been talking about conspiracies for centuries, especially in the last, 6 decades, since post Second World War. But all of a sudden we're just like, no, that's fine. That's something different.
Yeah, I think there's a really big disconnect between community expectations about how these tech companies should be operating,
Mm.
and how they actually do. And so we expect them to value our privacy and protect our data. Um, but if you look at the terms and conditions of their policies, it's anything but that. And really, who has the time to go through the terms and conditions of these policies? So I think the major issue here that needs to be addressed is that there are no policy frameworks
Mm.
in place that regulate how our data is used by these companies that have enormous power and have enormous, you know, have an enormous database of our, of our personal details. And so the thing is, because there hasn't been, there's been this kind of disconnect between old power and the new power that's
Mm.
emerging with big tech, and old power hasn't quite figured out or kept pace with what big tech is doing. And I'm talking up here about policymakers and people in government, and we kind of saw that with the when Facebook went to Congress, and
Right.
a lot of the very basic questions that were being asked, like, how do you actually make a profit if your service is free? And then we're like, well, it's called advertising. So I think because there is that disconnect, big tech has been allowed to kind of run rampant and do their own thing, and it goes against community expectations, and we need to bring it back in line.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I thought was also so fascinating about this film is the idea of making meaning. Um, the conversations taking place. Just even that scene where you know, Trevor, I think it's Trevor sitting in the thing in the they're identifying him based on his facial expressions and whatnot. But I was wondering how you what it means to make meaning and how that affects that shift in that power, if it does.
I mean, in a way, it's almost like we're trying to analyze this power,
Mm,
um, and figure out a way to see it or to recognize it. I think I think it's about recognizing these power structures, because in a lot of ways people wouldn't see a computer vision algorithm that's trying to analyze you and figure out who you are based on how you look,
mm,
what your job is based on how you look, how old you are, what your emotional state is. We wouldn't think that there's a lot of power in that, but there is,
mm,
because there are a lot of implications in terms of policing or in terms of getting promotions or advancing in your life or getting credit or insurance, etc. And so that's one of the main things we're trying to help people who are watching to do, is to recognize these power structures. Um, and when you're able to do that, you could perhaps engage with it in a different way.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. 'Cause, I mean, that was the follow up here is the idea of value judgment, because the way that that power informs our meaning. I love how the film addresses that also informs the way we make our decisions and about people or about situations. Um, so, I mean, I admit this question is a bit broad, and so forgive me. And if it's unanswerable, feel free to say. Um, it got me thinking about what do you think it constitutes truly the image of humanity? What is how do we define ourselves in a healthy way? I understand this is talking about power to structures and we're talking about surveillance and all these other things, but these idea of making meaning, it drew me to this idea of what it means to define who we are.
Mm.
And I was just wondering what you thought about that.
I think what's really interesting about Trevor's work is that what he has increasingly found, and he is someone who lives and breathes in that image making world, as an
Mm,
artist, as a visual artist. What he has found is that more images are being made now
mm,
just for computers, just for algorithms, um, and are only being seen by those computers than for humans. And so, how does that change the meaning of images when they're only being analyzed by computers, being made for computers to be analyzed by computers, and humans are taken out of that equation?
mm,
The thing that's kind of scary about that is that a lot of these algorithms are basically pattern recognition. So it's looking at what has happened in the past, or um, you know how images have been interpreted in the past, and they're interpreted by people, and people classify what these images are according to their own worldviews, and their own biases and subjectivity goes into that. And Trevor makes the point that it's usually white men in Silicon Valley who are making these systems and analyzing these images, or in more authoritarian countries it's the state apparatus that's doing that. um, and so if we're recycling basically history, if we're recycling basically the status quo, and exclude and by doing that we're excluding people who've been historically marginalized, um, and we're then embedding that into algorithmic systems that most people see as objective and neutral,
mm,
and most people believe what computers spit out, and they think, oh, okay, this is because computers are they're not making judgments based on their own biases. It's what the computer says. so it must be right. And you kind of come up against this time and time again with, governments and other industries relying purely on algorithmic data sets in order to make their decisions. But when the data is flawed, when the data is based on the status quo, it excludes people who do not conform to that, and that's dangerous for progression of society. That's dangerous for people who are thinking critically outside of these systems, outside of the status quo, and it has like major implications for our progression as a society.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's amazing when you really start reflecting on even just the nature of language and art, how it shapes vision and perspective so quickly. It just wires the brain. It's wild. Um, I I could we could keep going, but I know we're running out of time. I'm just wondering what it is that you hope people take away from the film.
Ah, look, I suppose the first thing is to kind of recognize these systems and think more thoughtfully about how you engage with them, um, so that we can have these conversations about, is there too much power in the hands of particular companies? Shouldn't there be more pressure on policymakers to regulate them better? um, I think at the very first instance, I think being able to recognize and see these structures allow us to have these conversations that then can lead to some sort of change that is better for our society. Because the profit models of these companies aren't based on a social good. They're based on keeping us inside their systems or on their platforms for longer. Doesn't matter if you're watching, far right content, or something that's harmful to you as a person, as an individual, and harmful to your emotional health. It's just about keeping you on there for longer.
Mm.
And I think that we need to figure out a way to make this more about being platforms for social good.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time. It's a wonderful film, and
Thank you.
thank you for this conversation. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.